It takes a lot of effort to build an investing portfolio, but would you believe that tearing it down can be even more complex? Retirement planning is notoriously tricky, and the fate of the retiree's lifestyle is at stake. But don't worry, we're going to share 5 tips to help maximize retirement income and make it last as long as possible. You're watching Inside Investing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Brian Rogers. Joining us is Rhys Martell, founder of Well Built Wealth. Rhys, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Brian. Awesome to be here.
All right, so one of the burning questions I have right off the bat, why do you think it's so important to have a retirement income plan?
I think the biggest one is really just peace of mind. Like everybody wants to know, what is my future going to look like? Like we want to know that our whole life long, but obviously moving from a stage of life where you're getting money, you're getting paid all the time, to moving into a situation where you're just relying on what you've built, like it can create a huge amount of anxiety for a lot of people. And so having just the peace of mind of having a game plan is huge. And of course, nobody wants to run out of money either, right? Like we do a lot of plans even for people who have a lot of money, and even they really want to know, am I going to run out of money? So I think it's just common to all of us to want to bring down the anxiety and know whether or not we have enough and whether or not we've done a good job.
And I think knowing is half the battle. So we're going to talk about a lot of that today. We've got some 5 steps that you can look at, or 5 different tips that we can look at. But before we get into our conversation, just a quick note to our viewers. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, so TD Direct Investing, so you don't miss an episode of Inside Investing. Make sure to let us know in the comments what you think about today's episode and what else you'd like to cover on the show. With that said, let's get into our conversation. All right, Rhys, what are some of the financial goals that a retirement plan can help an investor achieve?
Planning out your income. So just knowing how much money you're going to be able to have at different stages. And maybe you've heard, the phrases go, slow go, and no go before, where you're spending incremental amounts. Like you want to generally do a lot more in the early years. And so the go phase, it's kind of cheesy language, but it also really paints the picture quite well, I think, right? We tend to be more active, and then we start to slow down when we're in our 70s maybe. And then in our last stage, we're really not doing a lot. We might have more medical expenses, but we're not spending money on a lot of other things. And so just having a game plan that maps all of that out, super helpful. Reducing your taxes is such a big one. So knowing what accounts to pull from and when to start them and when to delay them, when to push them off. So that's another thing that having a plan will really answer. And I think we're going to get into it later. But we're also going to look at what happens. Like we're going to stress test plans always with clients so that we can see what happens if things go wrong, if they don't go the way we plan them. And so having a proper plan can really answer unexpected things as well. And so I know this channel deals with a lot of investors. And so probably topics like black swan events and things like massive market crashes are on their minds. And so having a game plan for what to do when those things happen is just key.
Now, you help your clients craft retirement income plans all the time. So, can you share an example of what one might look like and how different choices might lead to different outcomes?
Yeah, you bet. So we always want to know how someone is tracking with their income in retirement, whether or not they're going to have enough to reach their goals. And if you take from certain accounts first, there will be tax implications which affect your numbers in the end. Absolutely. So if we're looking at this chart here that I've submitted, this is a software that we use to map out people's plans. And if we in this scenario here, they're taking CPP and OAS at age 65. We haven't done any fancy planning there, but just wanted to show you drawdown difference. If they were using kind of the old school way of doing this, where you defer taking your RSPs as long as possible and draw down from your other accounts, so then you can see here that by taking their low tax investments, which is basically anything that they would have inside of a TFSA and then maybe drawing from a non-registered account, they're paying hardly any taxes in those years. And they may think that that is a really good strategy in deferring their RSPs so that those can continue to compound deferred growth and pull from those later. So in this particular chart, we can see that they're running 87% on track for meeting their retirement income goal. But if we just flip the screen here and bounce into the next chart, what I've done is actually just reverse it. So we haven't done anything fancy here. We're just looking at what if we did it the opposite way. What if we started just taking from all our high tax investments first and we pushed off non-registered and we pushed off TFSA until later? And so we had these more higher tax years earlier. We can see here that it actually puts them 89% on track of their goal. And if you look at that little legacy circle there, you can see that it also added 52,000 to the value of their estate just by making this one switch. So I know that this is like a not in-depth example, but it just really does paint, I think, a really clear picture of how choosing one path or another has absolute real-world implications.
All right. Well, now investments may be taxed differently depending on whether they're held in a registered or a non-registered account. What should investors understand about each type as they prepare for retirement?
Yeah, so there's the lure of the RSP when you're going into retirement that you get these nice juicy tax deductions, especially if you have high income. And so this is why we use an RSP in the first place. But when we go to pull that money out, it's fully taxable and that can hurt. Whereas a non-registered account, it's really only the growth on your money that is taxed, not the whole amount. You have your original capital that you can pull back that doesn't have tax implications on it. So those are kind of the two primary differences. And so when you're in retirement, you know that you're looking at one source of income where every penny you pull out of it is totally taxable. So the implications are massive. Whereas with a non-registered account, they're not as dramatic. I mean, it depends on what you have them invested in, right? Because if you're lending out your non-registered money and collecting interest, well, that also is fully taxable, just like an RSP. But if you have them in things that generate dividends, or capital gains, then the taxes can really start dropping. And especially with capital gains, there's no tax implication until you sell. So you actually can control your taxable income in any given year.
Those are a lot of really interesting considerations that you just even made me think of now. Is that when you start taking money out of that RSP, 100% of that is taxable. Is that a big factor that you're always considering?
Oh, totally. Totally. And I guess we'll probably talk about tax-free savings accounts a little bit later, but they're kind of the angel where we get the best of everything and no taxes.
Well, that being said, we're talking about this taxation on an RSP. Many Canadians save or retire for retirement using an RSP. What do they need to know when they're withdrawing money from this account in retirement? We already talked about taxes. What else do we need to know?
Yeah, it gets flipped into a RIF when you're ready to start taking income from it. And you have to do that by the end of the year that you turn 71 at the latest. And then once you do, there's a minimum amount that you have to take out of that every single year. And there's a schedule for that. I think another thing to pay attention to is that if you're keeping it in an RSP and you're pulling money out of it rather than converting it to a RIF and then pulling out money from it, is that there's automatic withholding tax that happens at source. So at the financial institution, no one gets a choice about this. I've had clients ask, like, well, can we just not do it? No, you can't. Depending on the amount of money that you pull out of an RSP, there's certain amounts that are just automatically withheld at source. So if you're pulling under 5,000, it's 10%. If you're pulling between 5,000 and 15,000, it's 20%. And then anything above that is 30% withholding tax. So you always have to factor that into your calculations when you're doing withdrawals. You need to think about how much do I need net from there and then factor it in. Now, the withholding tax is just one thing because the whole amount is actually taxable to you when it comes tax time. So you will either overpay or underpay with the withholding tax. But either way, it's still added all as income and you may owe a bit more or you may owe a little bit less. Marginal tax rates are king. You want to know your top tax dollar so that whatever you pull out of your registered accounts, you know how much you're going to lose to taxes. And there's going to be some line that you don't want to cross because it just gets too aggressive. And that's how our tax system works. The more money that you are making or earning, it gets taxed progressively more aggressively along the way. And so you just want to be careful that you don't start crossing into tax brackets that you didn't mean to get into, and therefore you're giving more to CR. So you just want to plan every year and kind of know where your sweet spot is. And so pre-retirement, like you could end up with a year where you don't have any income for some reason. Maybe you're between jobs, you're taking a sabbatical, whatever. You could actually pull out the first 15 grand you make in a given year with the credits. You don't pay any taxes anyway. So you could actually withdraw 15,000 from your RSP you'd still have to pay withholding tax, but you'd get it back later. So you always want to be watching your marginal tax brackets because there just may pop up opportunities throughout your life in certain years where it may make sense to actually pull a little bit out of your RSP, but you just want to be careful with that.
Another major source of income for many retirees are government support programs such as Canada Pension Plan, CPP, and old age security, OAS. What do you think is important for investors to understand about these programs as they pertain to retirement?
Oh my. That's like the most popular topic on YouTube. It's like pretty much clickbait. Like everyone wants to know, how does CPP and OAS work? Mostly CPP, because that's the one that you contribute into and your employer contributes into. So it's based on how much money you put in all the way along your working career. And 65 is the normal age. You'll get the full amount that you are entitled to at that age, but you can take it as early as age 60 if you want to, but you got to take a haircut on your benefit if you do that. It's 0.6 per month, which could be, if you took it at age 60, it would be 36% less that you would get for the rest of your life. So it makes sense sometimes to do that, but it's not a decision that you want to make lightly, because it's a lot less money. Now, on the other side, if you delay it, you can delay all the way up to age 70 and you get 0.7% extra for every month that you delay, which leads to a 42% increase, which is massive. Now, OAS is a little bit different. You can't take it early. Age 65 is as early as you can do it, but you can delay. And you can delay as late as age 70, just like CPP, but you won't get 0.7 extra for every month you delay. You'll only get 0.6 extra. So what we find when we're talking with clients a lot is that there's obviously more bang for buck in delaying your CPP than there is with old age security. And lots of people aren't comfortable delaying either, but if they are comfortable, many people will just delay one, and therefore they'll choose the one that makes the most sense, where there's the most bang for buck, and that tends to be CPP. Generally, people tend to only delay their OAS if they're still working and making a high income, because your OAS is actually income tested. And if you make too much money, it can start to get clawed back. And so once you're north $80,000 a year-ish right now, you start to lose some of it. And once you're about 130, it's all gone. If you're making 150 grand a year and you're 66, there is no point in taking your old age security. You're just going to lose it all. So you are far better off to just delay it and wait, and then it'll be increasing.
Well, you've done a great job. Thanks for helping us better understand the importance of setting up that retirement income plan and some of the key building blocks. But now let's get into your 5 retirement planning tips that can help investors get the most out of their nest egg. And speaking of CPP, your first tip is to consider delaying the start of it. How might this help extend a retiree's income?
It really does beef up the amount of guaranteed and index inflation protected income that you will have in retirement. You know, you could run out of all your money. And in that scenario that I just painted, if it was you and a spouse and you had $5,000 or $6,000 a month coming in from these two sources, you could run out of all of your money and very likely be fine on just that. So it can add a lot of stability to your plan, because that money is just coming. It's just coming no matter what else is happening. And as inflation ticks up, and we know that it does that, your benefits for CPP are also being indexed and growing with it. And it's the same thing with old age security. So I would say that it just adds a lot of stability to your plan, money that you don't need to worry about.
Well, what are some considerations to help an investor decide if delaying CPP might make sense for them?
Yeah, so life expectancy in my books is the biggest one. Obviously, if you don't have a large life expectancy or a long life expectancy, then you're going to want to take it as soon as you can and get as much of that money into your hands as possible. Obviously, if you're going to take it early and you're actually going to invest it, there's an argument to be made there. It's taxable income to you, but then you could put it into an RSP and kind of wash that for the time being. But you could, arguably you could do better than what CPP would do with that money. It depends on how well you think you can do with your investments, and then how well you actually do with your investments. That's, going back to what I just said before, it's the peace of mind with the CPP is that it is guaranteed, as much as anything can be.
All right. Well, let's move on to the second retirement planning tip, and that's to prevent an RSP from becoming too large in value. Having a lot of money in an RSP seems like a great outcome. What's the potential issue with that?
If you have put a ton of money into your registered plans, there is such a thing as having too much money in your RSP. It's a great problem to have. Obviously, all of us want to have that problem, but it will simply push you up into higher tax brackets throughout your retirement. And again, you could end up having income so high and forced to have that income that you could end up losing benefits like old age security to the clawback or the recovery tax, as it's properly called. And again, this is, I don't think that we should necessarily be pushing off RSP withdrawals as long as we possibly can, like we used to think. I think the sooner you get on that in retirement, the better off you're going to be. You just want to have a game plan, know your marginal tax rate, and then find the sweet spot for the amount that you're willing to take out. You're going to pay taxes now, or you're going to pay a ton of taxes later. You just have to figure out which one's more important to you, or the balance between the two.
And I know we've got a table on looking at RIF withdrawals, just so people understand that. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Rhys? Like, what's the process when you you're getting forced to take money out of that account?
Yeah, you can see there that it's just a percentage that ticks up with your age as your age ticks up. And so basically what the government is saying is, we've given you all of these tax deductions along the way. You haven't had to pay tax on this money, but we want some now, right? And so start getting it out. And then you're basically forced to take out more and more and more percentage wise. But if you're doing it properly, you're also winding it down and down and down and down. And so a bigger percentage doesn't necessarily have to always mean that you're pulling out more. If you have a game plan going in, then you can really flatten this out so that the RIF minimums, for some of our clients, they don't even matter.
All right. That being said, like in your opinion, at what point does an RRSP generally become too big and start to cause tax issues for retirees?
Yeah, so it's often said that 500,000 for one or $1 million for a couple, you're starting to get into some aggressive taxation issues. So that's what I would just say is the line. Once you start crossing that, you're entering into troubled waters. But again, troubled waters that everyone would dream to have. So
Rhys, you've talked about this idea of melting down an RRSP. So I've heard that term, the RRSP meltdown. Can you explain that a little bit further?
sure. I'll preface that by saying that I have talked about it and I've done a video on it and lots of people do videos on it. And it's a popular topic, but it's not always the right idea for everybody. Everyone's got a unique case and you want to look at your own situation. But the basic idea is you want to push off all of your other taxable sources of income as long as you possibly can and use those earlier years to pull out the taxable RRSPs. And so rather than stacking RSPs withdrawals on top of CPP and OAS and maybe a pension and everything else where it's pushing you up into higher and higher tax brackets, you push off all of that income into, let's say, age 70 or whatever, or even age 65. And if you're going to retire at 60, you use these years to get the money out of your RRSP in those earlier years. So if you wanted $50,000 a year in income, you're going to take none of that from CPP and OAS and anywhere else. You're going to push those off and you're going to pull $50,000 a year from your RSP, well, plus the taxes, right? And then when you hit age 65, then your CPP and your OAS come in and whatever else. And let's say that's now $30,000 in income. All you need to do is top up that $20,000 from your RSP. But now you've shrunken the size of your RRSP considerably in those earlier years so that you won't be left with that tax bomb that we talked about. And we can see when we do this, it makes sense for some people for sure, that they can absolutely get rid of their registered accounts by the time they're in their 80s. And they can leave a really delicious estate that's maybe just their house and a big fat tax-free savings account. And there's basically no taxes to be paid on that.
Yeah, I like that. So paying less tax is always a good thing.
Yeah.
All right. Before we continue, I have a quick question for our viewers. Are you enjoying the show so far? If so, then make sure you subscribe to TD Direct Investing's YouTube channel. And if there's a topic that you'd like to learn more about, let us know in the comments. Plus, follow us on X at TD Direct Invest to get a sneak peek at upcoming shows and a ton of other content designed to help build your investing knowledge. Okay, Rhys, your third retirement planning tip is to delay withdrawals from a TFSA as long as possible. Instead, you say drawing down an RSP and non-registered accounts first tends to make more sense. Why is that?
Yeah, now the RSP and non-registered, if you have non-registered together, tends to make a lot more sense. And not always necessarily by the numbers, not necessarily for tax reasons, but just the peace of mind of having this non-taxable account pushed off to the side where if some emergency comes up and you need 30 grand for a new roof or whatever it is, a new car or whatever, you do have this source of income that you can pull from that's not going to jack you up into a ridiculous tax bracket where you're going to lose 40% of it or 50% of it to taxes just from taking it out. you're obviously going to pay less tax throughout retirement if you're pulling some from your TFSA all the way along the way, right? Because that's income that won't be taxable. But just the safety net and the benefit, I would say, of pushing off that account until you need it or maybe never do just gives you all sorts of peace of mind throughout retirement, that you've got crazy flexibility. And no one going into retirement is looking to increase stress, right? Anything that you can do to set yourself up to be in a, like, as far as finances are concerned anyway, as peaceful as you can be about that, I think carries a huge amount of weight. But lots of times when we do the math anyway, it actually does make a lot of sense to push off TFSAs.
Yeah, I don't want more stress. And I like what you were saying on an easily accessible cash reserve. I've heard you say before, like having that TFSA or that taxable account. You can take that out and you know you're not going to pay that withholding tax or add it to your income. A couple of those things that you mentioned earlier. All right, your fourth retirement planning tip is to stress test your plan. What does this mean and why is that important?
Yeah, it is so important. Like, we can't just plan for rainbows and butterflies throughout all of retirement, right? And I think a lot of people do, or they don't know how to stress test. And it's just like part of the fundamentals of what we do in any retirement plan that we build. We build this wonderful cathedral, but then we got to come with some rocks and we got to chuck them at it and see what happens if things go sideways, right? Like, what happens to your plan if you have a market crash, like 1 year after you retire? It's like the worst possible time. But how would that affect the rest of your plan? It's a big deal, and you want to know what you would need to do if that were to happen. Or what if your rates of return were going to be lower all the way through retirement than what we were measuring? Maybe we were counting on 5, but you only get 4. Well, we need to know what your retirement would actually look like if you only got 4% that whole way through. Or what if someone passes away sooner than expected? What does that look like? How does it impact your plan? You need to have contingency ideas in place as well. Or what about higher inflation? Like, that's like an impossible number to pick right now. Financial Planning Standards Council, they're still recommending that we use 2.1%, but we have lots of clients that are not comfortable with using that. So, we do a base case that's a little bit higher, but we always like to chuck in a scenario. Well, let's just see what it looks like if it was 4% over the long run. What does that do to your plan? And I can just tell you right now, a bit of a spoiler alert, there is almost nothing that affects your plan worse than higher inflation.
All right, and I know you caught my ear in terms of you said, what if you passed away? Is there anything to consider there? I know I've heard before that a retirement account, it could be completely taxed if you end up passing away. Is that what can you do about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's just you and you pass away, there's no more risk to your retirement plan, so you're okay, right? But if it is a spousal situation, RSPs will roll over to your spouse, or they can roll over to your spouse, and there's no taxable implication at that point.
Okay, let's move on to our fifth retirement planning tip to hold a year or two's worth of cash on hand. How might that extend the runway of an investor's nest egg?
Yeah, lots of people scoff at me when I say that. But yeah, I refer to this as the war chest. And again, this is just a big peace of mind thing. We don't know what can happen, and there can be all sorts of economic storms out there, or just storms in your own life that are unexpected and cost money. And so if you know you've got a bunch of cash sitting on the side, no matter what is happening out there, markets are in pandemonium, whatever is happening in your own personal life, you have cash reserves that are unaffected by that. Now, obviously, cash reserves have a difficult time keeping up with inflation, but that's your only real risk there. And if you've got the rest of your money invested, you're kind of taking care of that anyway. But I just mentioned in stress testing last time, what happens if we have a big market crash? And it's not like what if. These do happen to investors, right? The economy is cyclical and these things do happen, but things may go down so low that the dividends and the interest that you're generating from your portfolio aren't enough to meet your income needs, but you don't want to sell any of that capital in an unfavorable time. Well, this is where having 2 years worth of your income needs just sitting on the side could fill that for you. Once markets recover, which they have every single time in history, and they go back up and higher than they were before, you can use that to replenish your cash reserves again. Now, further to the war chest, like having that 2 years worth, I always recommend that people budget in to their retirement income budget a certain amount each month to be topping up that war chest. You don't want to just go in with a lump sum and hope that's going to last you for 30 years. You want to keep adding to that thing and make sure that it's healthy, because you never know when you're going to need a chunk. And if you're always replenishing it, then you've always got a full war chest.
I like the war chest as well. Is this something, would this be inside the RSP or outside?
Yeah, so it would definitely be outside. I mean, I guess if you had to keep it in an RSP, then you could keep it in an RSP, but it's not much of a war chest if you have to pull it out and pay tax and lose 40% right off the top or whatever your tax rate happens to be, right? So, no, definitely want to keep that in. If you have the tax free savings account room, use a tax free savings account. If you've already maxed that with long term investments, which we recommend, then you want to keep that in just a non registered cash account. And I
All right.
usually recommend for a war chest that people use a high interest savings account so that it's very liquid. You could access it whenever you want, but you're getting a better interest rate than just leaving it at a bank. And if you've got 2 years worth of a war chest of income in your war chest, let's say that's $80,000, you could potentially take 40 of that because you're probably not going to need 80 grand in 1 year, right? But you could take 40 of that and maybe put that into a 1 year GIC to get an even better interest rate and just let that one keep rolling over.
All right. Well, then you can do battle with retirement if you have that an adequate war chest for sure. All right, Rhys. So let's put it all together. Can you walk us through an example of how a retiree might put what we've learned today into practice? Like, how would we tie this up into a nice, neat bow?
Yeah, okay. I would say that the first thing that you need to do is you need to get a plan. And I know that there's obviously services like ours where you can pay to have them professionally done, but there are free resources online. I believe I did do a video on that on how you can figure this out for yourself. And then I would say the next thing you want to focus on and making sure that you've got that war chest. And then you want to figure out whether or not delaying CPP or OAS or both or whatever is at all palatable to you because it affects so much of your retirement income. You really need to figure out first if you're comfortable whether or not it's even an option or whether you're just going to do it as soon as possible. Then, like I was saying before, you're going to want to figure out how much income you want and then what is your tax rate, your highest tax rate that you're willing to put up with, right? And then making sure that you build an income game plan that doesn't push you over that tax rate into the next higher tax bracket where you're losing more money than you need to. And I would say that that is pretty much how we do it.
Oh, that was a great job wrapping it up. Thanks so much, Rhys. So, one final note to our audience: if you're interested in hearing about one investor's retirement income plan, check out our past webinar with guest speaker Mark Seed. It's called "How I Plan to Optimize My Portfolio Drawdown in Early Retirement." It's available in the Learning Center on Webroker and on TD's YouTube page. All right, Rhys, we're going to have to leave it there. Any thoughts, any final thoughts on retirement income planning you'd like to share with our viewers?
Yeah, I would just say that we covered a lot here today, but YouTube is actually it's just such an incredible resource, and I've learned so much actually from just even other planners. But there's a number of really good planners on YouTube right now, and if you have questions about pretty much anything retirement planning related, there's a decent chance at this point in the game, Canadian specific, that you'll be able to find that on YouTube. So I would just say, check that resource as often as you need to. It's great.
Well, thanks again for joining us. And for those in our audience, make sure to register for our upcoming live webinars and check out our library of on demand content available in the Learning Center and on our YouTube page. See you all next time. Have more questions? Check out the links to the right and in the description below.